Hello everyone and welcome to the lecture on AWS Client VPN. So this lecture will contain all these topics. What is AWS Client VPN? Key components of Client VPN for the administrator. Key components of AWS Client VPN for the user. Getting started with AWS Client VPN. High level architecture. Client authentication. Split tunnel Client VPN. And types of client authorization. So what is AWS Client VPN? AWS Client VPN is a comprehensive, managed solution that enables your remote workforce to securely access resources within both AWS and your on-premises network. With AWS Client VPN, users can access resources in both AWS and on-premises environments, ensuring a seamless experience across different infrastructures. The service automatically scales up or down based on the number of users and their usage patterns, providing an efficient and cost-effective solution. As you migrate applications to AWS, your users can access them same way before, during, and after the move, minimizing disruption and ensuring smooth transition. AWS Client VPN, including the software client, supports the widely used OpenVPN protocol, ensuring compatibility and ease of use for your remote workforce. So basically we use AWS Client VPN to log in to basically to access AWS resources securely. So if you don't have a client VPN, normally you would access AWS console, management console and the services via the public internet. So all traffic would traverse via the public network. But when you have a client VPN, so you will on your local machine or your laptop or desktop, you will install a VPN client software, and on the AWS cloud, you will configure the AWS Client VPN service, and that service will have an endpoint. And this client VPN, remote client which is sitting on your desktop or laptop, will first connect to your with the AWS Client VPN service on the AWS cloud. Once the connection is established, all the communication will happen via the secure tunnel instead of going via the public internet. So let's say you don't have this, you will access it normally. You wouldn't have this secure tunnel, so the traffic would just go directly via the public internet. So this is basically to make sure to add a layer of extra security when you communicate with AWS resources. So not only that, you can use Client VPN to from here onwards you can configure it to even access your on-premises resources. So this can not only main purpose is AWS resources, but you can actually communicate, you can configure the on-premises resources as well. And this is supports the OpenVPN protocol. So key components of Client VPN for the administrator. So there are two users. So one is administrator, who will set up and configure the Client VPN, AWS Client VPN, and the users who are just the end users who will just use the functionality provided. So first we have Client VPN endpoint. The Client VPN endpoint is the resource that you create and configure to enable and manage Client VPN sessions. It is the termination point for all VPN connection sessions. Then you have a target network. A target network is the network that you associate with a Client VPN endpoint. A subnet from a VPC is a target network. Associating a subnet with the Client VPN endpoint enables you to establish VPN sessions. You can associate multiple subnets with a Client VPN endpoint for high availability. All the subnets must be from the same VPC, and each subnet must belong to a different availability zone. Then you have a route. Each Client VPN endpoint has a route table that describes the available destination network routes. Each route in the route table specifies the path for traffic to specific resources or networks. Then you have authorization rules. An authorization rule restricts the users who can access a network. For a specified network, you configure the Active Directory or the identity provider IDP group that is allowed access. Only users belonging to this group can access the specified network. By default, there are no authorization rules, and you must configure authorization rules to enable users to access resources and networks. Then you have the client, which is the end user connecting to the client VPN endpoint to establish a VPN session. End users need to download an open VPN client and use the client VPN configuration file that you created to establish a VPN session. Then client CIDR range, an IP address range from which to assign client IP addresses. Each connection to the client VPN endpoint is assigned a unique IP address from the client CIDR range. You choose the client CIDR range. For example, it could be 10.2.10.2.0.0/16. Then you have client VPN ports. AWS Client VPN supports ports 443 and 1194 for both TCP and UDP. The default port is 443. Then we have client VPN network interfaces. When you associate a subnet with your client VPN endpoint, we create client VPN network interfaces in that subnet. Traffic that is sent to the VPC from client VPN endpoint is sent through a client VPN network interface. Source network address translation (SNAT) is then applied, where the source IP address from the client CIDR range is translated to the client VPN network interface IP address. Then connection logging. You can enable connection logging for your client VPN endpoint to log connection events. You can use this information to run forensics, analyze how your client VPN endpoint is being used, or debug connection issues. Then self-service portal. Client VPN provides a self-service portal as a web page to end users to download the latest version of AWS VPN desktop client and the latest version of client VPN endpoint configuration file, which contains the settings required to connect to their endpoint. The client VPN endpoint administrator can enable or disable the self-service portal for the client VPN endpoint. Self-service portal is a global service backed by service tax in the US East region. Okay. Then key components from AWS Client VPN. So I'll just quickly run through it. This one is, we have already seen, client VPN endpoint. Your client VPN administrator creates and configures a client VPN endpoint in AWS. Your administrator controls which network and resources you can access when you establish a VPN connection. This is from the user's point of view, so users will just see very few information. And then you have VPN client application, the software application that you use to connect to the client VPN endpoint to establish a secure VPN connection. And finally, you have a client VPN endpoint configuration file, which is a configuration file that is provided to you by your client VPN admin. And the file includes information about the endpoint and the certificates required to establish the VPN connection. And basically you load this file into your VPN software. Okay, how to get started with AWS Client VPN. So first we have some prerequisites. So basically you have internet access, supported devices, and the browser for SAML based authentication. To establish a VPN connection, you must have access to internet, device, and client VPN endpoints that use SAML based federated authentication for single sign-on. Okay. So step 1, you obtain a VPN client application, AWS provided or OpenVPN based. You can connect to the client VPN endpoint and establish a VPN connection using the AWS provided client. It is supported on Windows, Mac OS, Ubuntu 18.04 LTS and Ubuntu 20.04 LTS or another OpenVPN based client application. Then download the AWS provided client from the AWS client download page or install any OpenVPN client application on the device. Step 2 is you acquire the client VPN endpoint configuration file from the administrator or using the self-service portal. And this file contains the information about the client VPN endpoint and the necessary certificates to establish the VPN connection. Then step 3, you import the configuration file, connect to VPN and provide the necessary credentials. Okay, and for Active Directory authentication, you have to enter your username, password or MFA code if it is enabled. For SAML based federated authentication, single sign-on, the AWS provided client will open a browser window prompting you to enter your corporate credentials before connecting to the client VPN endpoint. Okay, this is the high level architecture, how it looks like. So basically, you are a user over here. Let's say you have a laptop and you are just working from home. So you want to work with AWS resources, and we have made policies. Let's say you cannot connect directly, and we have configured the client VPN service on the AWS. So what will you have to do? You will install the client VPN, AWS client VPN, and the communication will happen through the transport layer secure TLS VPN tunnel. So you are going to the internet, but through a TLS tunnel, VPN tunnel. You connect here, and then on every private subnet there is a ENI, and that will actually the Elastic Network Interface, and that will basically, this is the low level, means under the hood, and that will lets you connect to the EC2 instances and all through this private tunnel. If this was not there, you will be connecting directly, but through, let's say, Bastion or some public subnet or something like that. Okay, next is client authentication. So client authentication is implemented at the first point of entry into the AWS cloud. It is used to determine whether the clients are allowed to connect to the client VPN endpoint. If authentication is successful, clients connect to the client VPN endpoint and establish a VPN session. But if authentication fails, the connection is denied and the client is prevented from establishing a VPN session. So types of client authentication, it offers three types, following types. One is Active Directory authentication, which is user based. Then we have mutual authentication, which is certificate based, and third one is single sign-on, SAML based federated authentication, which is again user based. And you can use one of the methods listed above alone, so just by itself, or a combination of mutual authentication, which is number 2, mutual authentication, with a user based methods such as the following. You can have mutual based and federated, mutual and federated, and second you have mutual plus Active Directory. So there are total 1, 2, 3 and the combination, so total 5 possible ways. So by itself or by combining in these two combination. Okay. So next one, there's one feature called split tunnel client VPN. So by default, when you have a client VPN endpoint, all traffic from clients is routed over the client VPN tunnel. But when you enable the split tunnel on the client VPN endpoint, AWS Cloud will push the routes on the client VPN endpoint route table to the device that is connected to the client VPN endpoint. And this ensures that only traffic with a destination to the network matching a route from the client VPN endpoint route table is routed over the client VPN tunnel. You can use a split tunnel client VPN endpoint when you do not want all user traffic to route through the client VPN endpoint. So let me try to explain. So at this service, you enable this feature called split tunnel, and this will push some configuration onto your local laptop, and in turn it will push some configuration to the software application which is running on your laptop and the client VPN software. So if you are accessing some resources which IP addresses are mapping to the AWS resources, let's say EC2 instances, then this software will connect to this endpoint. But let's say you want access Facebook, Google, Gmail, Twitter and all, because they have different IP addresses. This split tunnel will make sure this will go directly to the internet and not come here and then from here come here. You understand, right? Here it can go to AWS cloud and then it will have a egress out way to the, let's say, to the Facebook or Google, let's say. So we don't want go like this, we want go like this. So this will just make this software client intelligent enough to understand which IP addresses belong to AWS, and it should connect like this. But if it's Facebook, Twitter, Google, it should go directly. It should not go here and then come here. Okay, types of client authorization. So client VPN supports two types of client authorization. So we saw authentication, now authorization. So there are two types. One is security groups and one is network based authorization using authorization rules. So first is security groups. So when you create a client VPN endpoint, you can specify the security groups from a specific VPC to apply to client VPN endpoint. When you associate a subnet with a client VPN endpoint, AWS Cloud automatically apply the VPC's default security group. You can change the security groups after you create the client VPN endpoint. Okay, second is network based authorization is implemented using authorization rules. For each network that you want to enable access, you must configure out authorization rules that limit the users who have access. For a specified network, you configure the Active Directory group or SAML based IDP group that is allowed access. Only users who belong to the specified group can access the specified network. If you are not using Active Directory or SAML based federated authentication, or you want to open access to all users, you can specify a rule that grants access to all clients. Okay, and that's all. Thanks for watching.